There have been many unusual encounters and strange appearances occurring in the midwestern part of the United States. Michigan, Indiana, and Tennessee are three such states where people have reported seeing things that don't belong, things that they can't explain. The following three stories include one from each of these states. Be sure to listen to the end and let me know what you think. I remember it was a muggy August day in the mid-'80s. I think it was around 1986. My mom and I were driving from our home in Rochester, Indiana to Muskegon, Michigan to visit my grandmother for a few days. I was around 17 years old at the time, and I remember that I had just gotten my license. So even though the trip would take about 3 hours, it was a good trip for me to get some experience. We had been on the road for more than an hour when we approached a set of railroad tracks that crossed over a 2-lane highway. I believe at that point we were on Highway 31, but I'm not 100% sure. As we got closer to the crossing, I noticed something large and dark moving along the tree line on the far side of the tracks. It was weird because it seemed to be following parallel with us as we drove north, basically moving along with us, but ahead of us and within the trees. Now, my mom is a very observant person, especially when it comes to animals. She's always been able to identify any type of animal she saw by its movements alone, which made her more than qualified in my eyes as someone who could identify what this thing could be. She noticed it instantly without me even saying anything, and as we approached the tracks, she asked me to slow down so that she could get a better look at it. As I slowed the car down, my mom turned in her seat and leaned way out of the passenger window to get a better view of whatever it was. As she did this, I watched from my vantage point in the driver's seat as something large and dark sprinted from behind a tree across the railroad tracks and into another patch of trees on the other side. It covered quite a bit of ground in just a few seconds, which made me wonder exactly how big this thing was. Like, how long were its legs that it was able to do that? And why did it reveal itself to us, if even for that split second? My mom sat back up in her seat after it disappeared into the tree line on the other side. "I have no idea what that was," she said, "but it sure looked like a bear. I mean, it was furry and huge, but looked way bigger than a bear to me." I did agree with her somewhat, but I was also thinking it may have been some kind of a wolf or a large dog. I felt that it was definitely a large animal, but much larger than any dog I've ever seen. It had dark fur and appeared to be very muscular based on the way its body moved as it sprinted across the railroad tracks. To be honest, its movement was similar to that of a cheetah's in that it covered ground quickly. But the insane part was that it had been running on 2 legs. I think that's the part that really had us wondering what was going on. My mom and I just looked at each other for a few minutes after it disappeared, not really knowing what to say. We were both in shock at what we had just seen, and our brains were trying to process what it could have been. After a few moments, my mom said she wanted to go back and retrace our last 500 feet of the drive or so, just to take another look and be sure that there wasn't just something out there that had messed with our brains, like a dead tree or brush blowing around. I was hesitant, and I knew in my heart that there was no real logical explanation for this. It felt real, but not real at the same time, which was equally terrifying. And I didn't want to get too close to whatever that thing was. But my mom was insistent, so I turned the car around and slowly drove back. When we got there, we instead stopped the car and got out to take a closer look. I was not okay with this. But there was no sign of the animal anywhere. No footprints, no fur, nothing. It was as if it had just vanished. And that's when we heard a noise that I will never forget. It sounded like a woman screaming, coming from the direction of where we had seen the animal last, where it disappeared into the trees. We both just looked at each other for a few minutes, not knowing what to do, and then my mom said, "Now it's time to go." So we got back in the car and drove off as fast as we could. I basically gunned it past the spot where we had last seen it, hoping and praying that it wouldn't show itself again. Luckily, all went well. We got past that intersection of trees safely, and we were able to continue on to my grandma's. We didn't say much to each other after that. I think we were both still in shock from what we had seen and heard, thinking in our own minds about what just happened. We mentioned it to my grandmother, but she didn't seem to take us too seriously. I mean, she was kind, but basically moved on to another subject rather quickly. So that sort of woke us up, and we never really talked about it again after that day. And to this day, I still have no idea what we saw. I do know one thing for sure: it was not a bear or a dog, at least not the kind that we know of. This next story takes place in 1975. I grew up on a farm in Tennessee surrounded by dense trees and vegetation. When I was little, we played outside on the farm and in the trees, but that all changed in the fall of '75. We were surrounded by cornfields getting ready for harvest. Corn stood 6 to 7 feet tall, and you could literally get lost in it. We sometimes did when playing hide and seek with my cousins. My sister and I had horses, and we loved to go riding. We would explore the woods and the cornfields. That day, we took the horses down a farm road around this grove of trees and got ready to race once we hit the corner. My sister was only around 10 years old, so I kept a good eye on her, but she could handle horses well. We got 2 posts away from the corner, and the horses cut loose. But as we went to turn, they stopped dead mid-lope and suddenly reared up, knocking us both off. I still hung on to the reins and quickly got up to help my sister. She grabbed her horse. It was backing away, throwing its head. Mine was acting the same way. I struggled to get my sister up on her horse and keeping control of mine as it turned in circles. As I turned in circles trying to calm the horse, I saw it. All I said was, "Get on your horse," and threw my sister onto her saddle. She started crying, terrified. I let her horse go so it shot back to the farm like a racehorse at the gate. Luckily, she was able to hold on and made it back to the barn safely. I struggled to get on mine as I couldn't take my eyes off the thing at the edge of the woods. It was huge and hid behind a cedar. I couldn't really see its eyes, but I know it was watching me. I finally got on my horse, absolutely terrified. I let my horse go and she shot off towards home. Dad was already coming out of the house as my sister was screaming, "There's something in the woods! There's something in the woods!" I wasn't faring much better, crying in terror. We were kids and freaking out as kids do. My sister was clinging to my dad. The horses were worked up and still wide-eyed and trying to get away. Dad told us to get them in the barn until they calmed. We ran back as Dad came out with a shotgun and said, "Show me where it's at." Being kids and under the impression that my dad was invincible, we did as we were told. It was terrifying, though, the thought of going back. So my little sister stayed with my mom. Dad drove the truck to where we saw it. My brother came too. But of course it was gone. Nothing. Dad and my brother went and investigated behind the tree, looking down and then towards the field. My dad stood 6'2" and the tree 10 feet, and that damn thing had to be at least 8 or 9 feet. They finally came back and told me it was my imagination, but I swear to God it was there and it was real. The next day, a couple of neighbor kids and I, armed with a shovel and an axe, searched those trees for the thing that had terrified us. We went to that tree. The heavy leaf cover was all messed up and I saw scratches on the tree. Dad later said it was just them scratching there, and I didn't argue. My dad was never a liar, ever. He passed away in 2018, and sometime after he died, my mom told my sister and I a story we couldn't believe. After we had seen whatever that creature was, a few weeks later my dad came home from playing cards with friends and neighbors in town. He parked in the garage, which wasn't connected to the house. As he was walking across the yard and he heard something he's never heard. It was low, growling sounds that were getting closer and closer. It stopped him dead in his tracks. As he looked around, he felt like it was mocking him, making the sounds, but he couldn't tell what direction they were coming from. He told my mom he felt a darkness and fear like he had never felt before. He didn't want to scare us any more than we already were, but my dad was scared, and he told my mom, "Don't let the kids go in the woods." He kept the shotgun out that night and never usually did that. We weren't allowed into the woods, which was hard to do because the farm was surrounded by them. I do remember one night that fall, the horses were crying and running in the horse pen. Dad went out with the shotgun, but I don't know what happened. My sister and I never did race the horses there ever again. There was something there. I swear on that. Thanks for listening. I've never told this story to anyone. I was scared to tell anybody until now. I live in southern Michigan, just south of Kalamazoo, and I want to share with you something that happened to me when I was in the woods behind my house collecting firewood. Oh, and this happened about 7 years ago, by the way. It was in the early evening, and I was walking down a hill towards the creek when I heard something large moving in the woods to my left. It made a loud, crashing sound as it moved through the underbrush, and it sounded like it was headed straight for me. But despite the noise, I couldn't see anything at all. I stopped and stood still and listened intently, wondering what could be making such a commotion. The sounds stopped abruptly too, right when I did. But then they started up again. But they were on my right this time and now heading away from me until I couldn't hear it anymore. And then after that, I became very aware of all the noises around me, and I kept glancing around nervously while continuing to gather wood. Suddenly, they seemed to be coming at me from all directions. And then a few minutes later, I heard twigs snapping off to my left again, but further away than before. There were several loud snaps, followed by silence, and then more noises further away still. I was beginning to get nervous that something was honing in on me. After about 10 minutes of all of this, the noises stopped completely and didn't resume for the rest of my time in the woods. So I went back to my house and I asked my neighbor if he had ever heard anything unusual in the woods behind our houses, and he admitted that he had heard weird sounds before, but that he never saw whatever made them, and he felt uneasy when it happened to him too. So it was exactly the same story as what had just happened to me. Neither of us had a good concrete answer for it. I've never heard anything like it before or since. My best guess is that it was a bear, but I'm still trying to figure that out. I mean, bears usually just keep moving in the same direction unless they're following something, like prey, or being chased away from a food source. I don't know of any other animal that makes that kind of a big noise, and whatever made those noises was much too large to be a deer or any other typical local wildlife. I mean, I've been back to those woods many times since then, and I've never experienced anything like it again. Believe me, I was looking and listening for it. Maybe whatever it was must have been moving around on its own rather than tracking me specifically, which does relieve some of my anxiety. But why did it sound like it started heading towards me one minute and then away from me the next? And what made all those loud snapping noises? It sounded like two pieces of wood being forcefully broken apart, one at a time, big ones too. And there were several distinct cracks each time. Anyway, there's just no answer. So since then, I've read a lot of the stories on your site and other sites, and I have some similarities to other encounters, but mostly mine was just very strange and weird and unique with nothing actually visible to even report. So still, I decided to finally report it here because I was just reading online about a man who found a dead dog-like creature in Wisconsin called the Beast of Bray. And for whatever reason, that story prompted me to write into you. I don't know why. And oh yeah, back when all this happened to me, the one thing that stood out the most, I think, was how loud the noise was, even though it was coming from what seemed like far away. It was like something really strong, and really powerful was making it. That's what I can't get over. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Lilith Dread, who releases almost every single day. Also, if you like true crime, then check out Lilith Dread True Crime. There are new releases several times a week.